Hey there, lovely people! Welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammi, and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learn with you. This week we are talking about a book I won in a Goodreads giveaway, and I entered it because the cover looked interesting, and I was like, yeah, sure. Didn't read the summary on this one, but you know me, that's just sort of who I am. I probably wouldn't have picked it up had I read the summary. I read the summary after I won it, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll read it. Just because it was outside of what I would normally pick up for myself, it wasn't necessarily like a bad time. If you were interested in a summary, I'll give you a quick one of the things that stood out to me. The Night Ship is two timelines tied together by two very unique child protagonists. In 1612, Macon is on a boat on its maiden journey to go find her father. She's someone who enjoys adventure and is optimistic even with her mother's recent death. And in 1989, Gil, having also recently lost his mother, has to move in with his grandfather on a small fishing island for the rest of the fishing season. He spends his time navigating the strange island politics as well as exploring the history of the ship that sunk 300 years ago in this area. The very same ship that Macon was on. So let's get into my thoughts on this one. The parallels that are tying these two timelines together between our two protagonists are super interesting. They are done really well, and you start to see the common threads between their two personalities while still seeing them as very individual people, and their personalities align just enough that you see their value and how their struggles align with each other in these very different times. There's also the similar parallel of like, this ship is technically a small space. It's a very big ship, but you're contained to your specific areas. You're only allowed to talk to the same people. You have that like same thing every day kind of experience, where also this fishing island is very much so the same people, the same situation 95% of the time. So they have the same kind of social structures that like you have to navigate talking to people the right way and not talking to the wrong people and dodging these dangerous things and dangerous situations, and they have those things in common. And you see how like time didn't really bring people into a different space. They're all kind of the same, but the context around it is different. And it's really interesting to watch those parallels appear because they show up gradually and you start to see more and more things that are the same but different. I think that the way the shipwreck was introduced was really interesting because the first chapter you are in 1628 with Macon, and you're like, wow, this is the boat. Cool, awesome, we're on this boat. And you like get to meet a bunch of people on the boat, and you see like how exciting this boat ride is and like all of these things that are going on. And then in the second chapter, you're in 1989 with Gil, and Gil shows up on this island and he's talking to a lady who lives there, and she's just like trying to get him to be comfortable. And she just drops the bomb that like this ship sunk here. But we're as readers like, what? Really? I mean, it's probably in the summary. Yeah, it's in the summary. There on the reef-shrouded island, he discovers a story of an infamous shipwreck, ... So like, it's really early on that we're introduced to this concept that the other characters that we are paying attention to are not gonna make it. While at the same time, we know that they're not gonna make it in general to the point where Gil's at because it's 300 years. It's just like the way that they don't make it is the sad part. So we get enough of the drama that's going to happen in Macon's story that I wasn't super interested. It took me a while to get into this book. And then once things started happening that were leading towards the information that I already know happens in that timeline, I started to get more interested in it. I also think that the world building that was put into this, the creation of the people in this and the details of the characters, and putting a 1989 storyline in this based off of a true story about the shipwreck was really interesting and done really well in a way that it feels fully fleshed out. It feels like it could have been an actual historical telling, but you get that tie in the whimsy of having the second story that makes it just a bit more engaging for someone who wouldn't have picked up this book originally. So what do I think could be improved? This is generally just a me complaint because this is not a book that I necessarily would have picked up. And I know that this is not necessarily something that would make the book better for the people who actually would have wanted to pick this book up. But for me, I wish that there was either a delay between when Gil found out about the shipwreck and we found out about the shipwreck. And like, we find out a lot of details in chapter 2 about what's going to happen in the 1628 timeline. It drew me in enough that I was like, okay, I have to keep reading to see how this happens from her perspective, from Macon's perspective. But nothing really started happening until about 200 pages in, and this is like just shy of 400 pages if I'm remembering correctly. It is 385 pages. 200 pages in was just like a little bit too long for me to actually care about what was going on in Macon's storyline. I was very engaged with what was going on in Gil's storyline because I didn't know what was going to happen there. I didn't know what was going to come. I had no foreshadowing, no dramatic irony. I didn't know anything that he didn't know. So I was actually engaged with what was going on for his story. Whereas Macon's, I was like, all right, I know we need to get to know you, and I know that we need to get to know all of these people so that we can have that emotional response to when everything bad happens to you. But at the same time, I don't want to. And I don't know why I don't want to. I know what's going to come. And I want to get there. I just wish there was more happening that we knew about through Macon's perspective, because there is more happening that we find out later in the story, but we don't know about it when it's going on, which makes it not as engaging as I would have wanted it to be. But again, that's just because I am not the kind of person who would naturally gravitate towards this type of story. This is very much a slice of life kind of story where you are actually staying with the people and like experiencing what they're going through. And not all of it is leading towards the conflict. Not all of it is progressing the story in the same way. And that's just not always what I am there for. Going off of that, there are a lot of unanswered questions that just sort of happen because you have child narrators. And while they are able to pay attention to a lot more than what the adults in their timeline give them credit for, I wish we were able to explore more than what those particular characters were actually able to explore. There were a lot of things that I wanted answers to that a child would not seek out answers to. And that's just sort of the nature of having a child narrator. So what can writers learn from this story? This is another great example of putting your interests into a story format. It's based on a true story, so it's clearly something that drew the author's attention in a way that she wanted to explore this historical event in a more creative fashion, where there are other stories that can look at time frames, eras in time, historical events, tasks, skills, talents, stuff like that. The Immortalist was one of the stories that I was like, it's a really good thing to be able to dive into different interests, because all 4 of the siblings in that story had different things that they were interested in, different things that they cared about. And that led to the author having the opportunity to explore all of those different interests, to be able to navigate them for the character in a way that is effective. This is the same general thing where you dive into something that is interesting to you and you're able to learn more about it while still producing something of your own at the same time. This is a good example of the complexities that a child narrator can understand, and it does so without making the adults around them stupid, which is a trend that you see a lot with child protagonists, where it's like, oh, I'm so much smarter than the adults around me, which is not necessarily the case, though many a teenager thinks that they are. It just sort of happens, but not all situations, especially in a story that is written for adults, making the adults not seem stupid is a really great benefit to keeping people engaged with the full story. And it's interesting to see a story that is written for an older audience but told from the perspective of a child. We don't see that super often. A lot of times the way that you can really focus in on what age range you want your readers to be is based on how old your protagonist is, but this is not a book written for children. It's got a lot of stuff that you would not want somebody Macon and Gil's age to read, and that's something that makes it really interesting, is because this is their lives. Kids can go through things even if they aren't necessarily always exposed to it in the arts and literature and storytelling based on their age range. This is also a really great example of paralleling and juxtaposing things, and it gives good reasons for doing so. It doesn't naturally like come out and say like, here's why I'm doing this, but you can read into it and see what the purpose is behind creating those parallels and juxtapositions between the 2 timelines. And it does this really well. Another book that I think does this really well is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. While that is paralleling between one person's life and various time frames, it does the same kind of thing where it shows like time doesn't really change people all that much, and this is doing that really well. If you wanted to have that reason to parallel or juxtapose things in your story, this is giving a lot of really good examples for a lot of different reasons throughout the whole book. But that is all that I've got for you today. This was technically an ARC read, but let me know if you've heard of this book. It has been checked out in audiobook form the entire time that I've had it at my library, so people have heard of it. Let me know if this is something that you would want to read. Let me know if there's anything that you read outside of your comfort zone just because it's in front of you and how that experience was for you, because I'm actually curious how this is for other people, because not everybody decides I'm gonna make a video on this book, so I have to read it. And I'm curious what other people's experiences are with that. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It'll really help me out and show YouTube that maybe other people would enjoy this video as well. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button. I'm here every Tuesday and Saturday for Writing Tip Tuesdays and Story Study Saturdays, so I will be back here on Tuesday.